Welcome back, everyone, and we're now ready to hear our speaker, James O'Dea, and he's, as I mentioned, he's involved in many different projects. Formerly, he was a fellow of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and recently its president. He's lectured all over the world. He's written quite a few different books. His latest book is called, as we mentioned, is called Creative Stress, and he's just recently returned from Rwanda. And one of the things that's occupying him most recently is called the Social Healing Project. And we're really grateful to have him come talk to us this morning. Here's someone with a big perspective and a big commitment. So let's give him a big welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be back here on the edge of the edge. It's been an intense 6 weeks for me. I was in Israel, Palestine, meeting with maybe 40 different activists and leaders in either side of the peace movement, social healing movement. I was with the Shahak family you may have heard of, who helped create the Bereaved Family Forum. Their 16-year-old daughter was blown up in a terrorist bomb. And out of that tragedy, they reached out to others and said, if you're in as much pain as we are, let's change the story. Many people like that. And then in Rwanda, 16 years after the genocide, I was director of Amnesty International in Washington during that genocide, screaming at the world to pay attention, asking the Western powers not to abandon this nation as they did. They all left before the genocide. And to see 16 years later the profound level of societal healing. Rwanda has much to teach us. Indeed, it was an extraordinary process. I came back from that and I was asked to be part of a dialogue that the scientist David Bohm created 19 years ago with Native Americans, looking at the different modalities of knowing around indigenous and scientific perspectives, but realizing, as Bohm did, that the cosmology and language system of Native Americans was very similar to his view of quantum reality. And out of those dialogues, of course, the book Blackfoot Physics was created. I urge you to read that if you're interested in that. And this particular gathering was on time travel, so that's why I'm preambling this, just so you know I've been time traveling with Native Americans and scientists. Very profound dialogue about the nature of time, both the psychological, cultural dimensions of it and the physics of it. As you know, Einstein said time is an illusion, but a very persistent one. And then just a few days ago, I came from Minnesota, where I was keynoting the Qigong conference. And if you're sitting with 200 Qigong practitioners, I can tell you the vibe is just like... And speaking about universal energy, which is an interesting segue into this notion of stress, because stress is energy, isn't it? It's energy that comes at you. So just to get a little perspective on energy, scientists say that the material surface of the world is about 5%, 25% is dark matter, and 70% is what they infer to be dark energy. And if you were to take any portion of space and try to extract the 0-point energy, the energy in there would be 10 to the power of 120. So it gives you an idea that we are in a deeply energy set. We think this is empty space, but in fact, so energy is pervasive, isn't it? And then it comes at us. You know, it's very modern thing to use the word stress the way we do. I mean, the poet stresses language, doesn't he? Or she. The musician uses, of course, elements of stress. So it's a relatively maybe 20th century phenomenon where the automatic inference around the word stress is that it's negative. So I'm not really going to talk about negative stress. That would be totally redundant because there are so many books on negative stress and how to relax, from all the healthy ways to relax to the abundant pharmacopoeia that now exists in modern civilization, that little butterfly that comes for you at night, you know. Dreamy butterfly. Yes. So this is about creative stress. It's about that acknowledgement that we were hearing in our conversations, that no great leadership is possible without encountering and taking this energy that comes at you and transforming it and transmuting it into creative leadership and potential. No mother, no parent lives without that creative engagement with stress, right? How do the behaviors of our children and our response to them get transformed into creative, healthy living together, community building? And the book Creative Stress is about the personal, but it's also about the planetary. So don't confuse me in that sense, because my interest, you would have to suspect, having been director in Amnesty and the Seva Foundation and Noetic Sciences and doing the kind of work I do around the world, that I'm rather interested in the social body. And the subtitle of the book is about personal and planetary upheaval. We are really at a time when nature has never been so stressed, right? Negatively punished by our behaviors. And we're called upon to transmute all of that unskillful behavior. 1/3 of the Earth's species have been lost since 1970. Wow. There is an Exxon Valdez every year in Nigeria. Every year, the scale of an Exxon Valdez spill pollutes Nigeria. See, and some people say, well, no, don't focus on the negative, James, you know, the Rwandas and the, all these things. And I say, no, I really want to challenge that idea, that I am deeply positive. I think, in fact, I'm extremely positive. And the way you get to the true positive is by not living in denial, by seeing the nature of things and then saying, wow, this is the scale of the problem, let's transform it. You see? Rather than, oh, I don't know, and don't look there. So we can talk about that a little bit more. But people say to me, well, you know, I've done many media interviews around this. Well, how did you get into this topic? I said, well, here's the story, here's the fractal. I was conceived on November the 10th, 1950. And my sister died on November the 11th. And my mother, when she was mourning the loss of her first daughter, discovers that she's pregnant, that she's carrying me. That close to life and death. And so I experience her pain, her suffering, her woundedness. As I'm growing into life, I'm almost reaching towards her heart to say, Mama, I would like to make it better for you. And then I'm born, of course, and she says, the courageous and wonderful and healthy woman that she was, that's the end of the mourning period. We now have to focus on celebrating this life. And so when I have, in my own work, been in Beirut during the massacres of the Palestinians in Sabra Shatila during the war, during the civil war in Turkey where I was knifed, where my house was machine gunned, in Guatemala digging up bodies, that is not the end of the story for me. So that's when people say, about this negative, positive thing, I say, I have been into the very darkest shadows of the universe, of this part of the universe anyway. And I can tell you that what is emerging is a new human being, is a new humanity. That's pretty positive, because we need it. We need to change the story. We need to transform the story. So I say, in the book, both at the personal and the collective level, I use this concept of 3 stages: the direct encounter with stress, the handshake, and the full embrace. And the direct encounter is the fundamental truth process that is required to transform energy, right? So anything that comes at you that is negative, your kid has been arrested on drugs or whatever it is to face that energy. The obstacle is your teacher. Face your teacher. The universe in all its glory has come towards you with this particular set of circumstances and says, deal with it, and through dealing with it you will grow, you will expand. Your heart will be broken and it will become more spacious and compassionate. Wow. See, so the true, what I call the true story, is in fact, yes, through the brokenness you will become wondrously powerful in terms of your healing abilities. But that direct encounter, do you know the science is so wonderful these days? It's so accurate. The body is an antenna of universal wisdom. It's also an antenna of truth. It knows when it's in the presence of truth. Your body, if we were to wire you up, if we were to look at your what's happening in your blood system, in your nervous system, and many, many indicators will tell us, way beyond the basic science of, the lie detector. It's gotten, which part of your brain are you using at this particular moment? Aha, that's not the part of the brain, if you were answering truthfully, that you would be using. It's, it's that deep. So the direct encounter says, yes, I'm going to encounter this with truth. I'm going to hear the truth in this and try to understand it. Which gets into our basic model of how do we respond and how do we learn. And we're not particularly well taught, are we? We're not taught in schools how to learn, so much as that you learn what the content of this subject is. So you're taught premature certainty. I got the answer. Premature certainty. How confused you are. Congratulations. Can you imagine the teacher saying that? I'm so pleased that you're well done, you're confused. Because that sense of confusion is the wrestling with truth, isn't it? It says, I don't know. And in the not knowing, something emerges. I love the fact that Mother Teresa, when she died and they were reading her diaries, she struggled even with God. She struggled with profound doubt. What a creative life she led. So that direct encounter is so important. And we know, sort of even in the basic physics of energy, You do, not now, not ever, actually, never. Go away. This energy is your humble and obedient servant, and it says, okay, I'll just wait until you're ready. 20 years later, your blood pressure's going up, your stomach's getting tighter, you know, you're wondering what's going on. I'm your humble and obedient servant. I had a message to bring you, and you didn't listen. Are you ready to listen now? Are you ready to hear? That's the nature of energy. All the way down to cellular memory, right? We now know from heart transplants, we know so much about the nature that memory is held in at the cellular level. So that's a good reminder. And we can think of this actually in the social body too, right? The cellular memory of the social body, the collective memory, and how that needs to be transformed. You will probably, some of you think it's quite negative to say there was a genocide of Native Americans in this culture, and it's never really been dealt with. You go to Australia, and in the 90s, the Supreme Court in Australia said, the very legal basis we used to colonize Australia was a fallacy, was inappropriate. We said it was, terra nullius was the legal basis, meaning there was nothing on the land. And the Supreme Court said not only was there nothing on the land, there was a people on the land, and we didn't recognize them as people because they said they belonged to the land. And we said, well, if you own land, you're more human. If you buy up land, the Supreme Court. And then shortly after, the Mabo decision saying, we sent all these children and took them from their homes and educated them in other places. That was wrong. That's a very positive direction to go. Then in I think it was 2002, they created Sorry Day in Australia and it's wonderful now. School children saying to Aboriginals, doing class projects, communities doing, we're really sorry. We just didn't know in this part of our own evolution what we were doing. Now we're more conscious. And so healing hath begun at a societal level on a really interesting thing, by directly encountering the truth and dealing with it. So from the personal to the collective, we need that process, don't we? And then the sort of what I call the default response to dealing with stress begins early in life, doesn't it? And we know so much in psychology about how those patterns develop. And so think of maybe 7 years old, the person you thought was your best friend didn't invite you to the birthday party. Oh, God. Or your father didn't come just to that baseball game when you really hit the home and you weren't seen. Or the deeper disappointments when your parents, are separating or something like that. But how did you deal with? What was your first response, your default response? Were you the tantrum? Did you express it like that? Did you push the energy back? Because if you're thinking, think of all of this as energy. What are you doing with the energy? It's coming at you. And there's still people who are doing that, when they're a lot older, aren't they? Or the people who say, it doesn't matter to me, denial. Or run upstairs and mope in your bedroom and maybe take out the candy bar and self-medicate with some candies. Who are still self-medicating, except it's not candy bars anymore. So looking at, this is why it was so wonderful to be with these Qigong people. By the end of the conference, I was like dancing. Because, they talk about that finding the true center and how to work with energy so that you are experiencing the flow and you're experiencing in your body where those blockages to the flow are. So That's fundamental sense of how do we recognize that in ourselves and in society. And then the second phase is what I call then the handshake with. So if you've really developed this honesty and direct response, you get to a point where you say, everything that comes my way is my teacher. Everything, no matter what form it takes, it's my teacher. And I'm dedicating my life to my own growth and development and my conscious awareness. That's when it starts to get positive, right? Because anything that's thrown at you, you say, hello, darkness, my old friend, you've come to visit me again. There's no way out of the story, is there? Because you say, whatever it is, I'm in it. And I'm going to grow through it. I'm going to expand. You have that, buzzsaw encounter with stress, death of a close friend, whatever it is, a close relative, you lose your house burns down. How are you doing? I'm getting back in the flow. It's that sense of encountering the flow of energy. I'm getting back in the flow. That's an expression we use, isn't it? The deep flow of the whole universe. Right? That's what we think of at the quantum level of flow, flux, the flow. Native Americans talk about surfing the flow. Surfing the flow. So, I have this notion that, you have the bog, and you have flat land, and then you have the higher elevation. And flat land is when you deliberately contain the energy, so you're always fine, actually. How are you doing? Fine? Fine. You can even hear in the frequencies of the voice, it's tamped down. I'm not going to let my dreams escape. I know where that leads to. That leads to disappointment, right? Tamp down your dreams, keep it flat. It's sort of all manageable. We've got a lot of flattening both at the personal level and the societal level, haven't we? Tamp down your dreams. Or, the swamp land. How are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. You're always going around the swampy areas. You know where they are. And your life is a constant maneuvering around. Don't go there. That's going to lead to problems. And then higher elevation is when you see those mountains. The I Ching says, mountain arresting progress. It's a very good thing. It's a very good reading if you get that in the I Ching. Mountain arresting progress. Sounds like... And yet the mountain arresting your progress is say, get yourself ready for the climb. Get your supplies. Get what you need. Organize, and then start that climb to higher elevation. And when you meet that energy, you recognize it because it's got a certain vitality, doesn't it? It says, the challenge is great. The neuroscientist Jair Levy says, probably more than anything, what defines human progress is our ability to rise to challenge. And the challenges are so significant, aren't they? Are you keeping in flatland? Or are you actually, and what do we do together to start the climb out of forms of consciousness that are not only tamped down, they are really in versions of what is needed for humanity. You know that 5%, the US has 5% of the world's population, right? A little less. Did you know that the US imprisons 25% of the prisoners held on planet Earth are imprisoned, incarcerated, locked up in America? Tamp it down, control it, get them off the streets. Don't try to heal them. Don't try to restore them. Don't try to recognize that that could easily be you. Punish. That's a stress response, isn't it? It's a stress response to, chaos on the streets or crime or whatever it is. But it's also a level of consciousness, isn't it? It's a worldview. It's a worldview that says, I can see no possibilities other than doing it in this very limited way. Are you with me on this? Are you seeing how this is in fact a social stress response that is denial, but it's also around worldview and consciousness. Let's just flick back to Rwanda. How much time do we have here? Are we tracking?
About 20 minutes.
About 20 minutes. Let's flick back to Rwanda. And by the way, just in case some of you, because I can see it's early morning and I'm a little excessive, just to remind you of something, in rhetoric, your brains are conditioned to go from the specific to the general and from the general to the specific, to follow the point, right? Jacob Needleman says the Western mind is very pointed. It's looking for the point. And so some of you I can see are like, wow. Because I'm giving you some points, but I'm also Celtic. So I'm wandering. I take you to the edge of a point and then I run back over here. And why is that? Because the Celts and the Arabs are said to have a similar rhetorical style. It's called the zigzag. Because the point is not to get too pointed, to make sure that the emotional undercurrent is where you're also supporting. So the point is to take the journey together. So I just wanted to give you a little help for those of you like, wow, this guy is... Rwanda. So now we're back in Rwanda. You know what? The Rwandan government allowed me into a gacaca court. When Kagame came to power, there were 1 million people, many of the bodies still lying in the countryside, murdered. There were 200 to 400 women raped. There were hundreds of thousands of orphans. There were 2 million refugees on the border. There was no money. Every penny in the banks was taken by the exiting genocidaires. That's what he inherited. 16 years later, it's a hugely different story. And one of the things that he did was said, let's reconcile. Let's use restorative justice, not punitive justice. Here's genocide. You could very easily get into a punitive modality. And he said, no, the only way to change the story is to go back to our indigenous restorative justice modalities. It's called gacaca. It means on the grass. They allowed me into a gacaca course. I was one of the few Westerners who've been allowed into a whole day's process. It was so exciting that this is an indigenous approach that says, the purpose of justice is to find out the truth, not to play lawyers' games, but to, find out the truth and have the community involved in the truth-telling process. So it was so exciting. The whole community's there. And anybody can speak. There are 5 elders in the community that are appointed for the process. And so you can say, Judge, do you think he might be lying about that? Because at 3 o'clock, my neighbor said they saw him with a machete walking down the street or whatever it was. And you can see in the room, you can feel, as I was talking about that current of truth, you can feel when the community is sensing, wow, we're getting closer to the truth. And when you get the truth, the object of the truth process is not punishment, but then now we have a basis to reconcile because the truth is out. Now you have a chance to say, will you serve the community, or are you still going to hold those genocidal thoughts about, you know, the Tutsis are cockroaches? 70,000 people have been processed in this way, back, you know, who've committed murders, back in their communities, back doing healthy things to restore the faith and trust of the community. Wow! You think of that as a massive stressor, and facing it, and dealing with it, and telling the truth, and moving on. What that does to the social flow of energy. So they're now talking about Rwanda as the Switzerland of Africa. It has some issues, but the cleanest in terms of banking, least corruption. It's becoming a model. Why? Because they're transforming the story. So if you're having a bad hair day, get a grip of reality. You know what I mean? You know, we talk about stress. Yeah, I'm so stressed, and I've got all these emails. My cell phone keeps ringing. There is something in that a little optical delusion that we live in, and it's like, let's wake up to the planetary reality and the challenges we face, and yet the modalities that exist in human consciousness. So when you are really in that handshake, you become more dialogic, you become more healing. You're the wounded healer. You've been broken, you've been opened. Now you can heal others. You can expand the compassionate field of creative action in the world, right? You can respond. You're more subtle. Subtlety is so important, you know. For those of you who, and there are a number of you in this room who are interested in that energy field, it's not only energy, it's energy and consciousness. We're seeing the emergence of the dialogic, the subtle, the healing, compassionate human being, forgiving. That's what is emergent. That's what I see coming out of South Africa and the truth and reconciliation process in Rwanda. I actually even see it in Israel-Palestine, even though at the political level it's blocked. Out of the cauldron of these historical traumas and difficulties and challenges, a more spacious human being is emerging. And the subtle is so required. You know, I think of the truth games that get played when you try to enforce your truth and you have every dot in your truth line up. I call it rigor mortis of the truth. You know, you can prove everything. Every dot, you know, lines up. But the problem is there are no spaces in those dots for other people's truths. So the truth likes to breathe. And some evolutionary pressures push us into a place where truths polarize at first and then do wretchedly unpleasant things in that polarized state, and then learn slowly in evolutionary process that I can dance with truth. I think I told this group before about the women's movement in Cambridge, on either side of the abortion debate. You know, they went into dialogue for 6 months and came out of the dialogue and said, you know, we're even more passionately pro-choice or pro-life. People said, well, that dialogue didn't work. And they said, oh no, actually, we now take vacations together. We watch each other's kids. We found community. We found the ground of being under which supports the diversity of our truths. So our truths can exist in a ground of being that holds them. That's what we're looking for in evolutionary terms. That's what we're looking for in societal healing. And so that stress, that energy of the universe is not going to go away, is it? It's not as if somehow we get into this la-la land of everything's wonderful. I'm sorry for those of you who practice this and maybe think I'm being negative, but I call it the false positive. It's make everything look good. Don't look at the other realities. The false positive, I believe, is the negative in disguise. Whereas the true positive says, let me enter and encounter and rise to the challenge. And the challenge cannot be risen to if it's denied. If it's, you say, don't, climate change, how much denial do we have on climate change? Huge. We cannot really face that problem until we embrace it. So, the third phase that I talk about in the book around creative stress is the embrace. You know, many people like to quote Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi these days, and everywhere I go, every conference practically, somebody stands up and says, "Out beyond right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there." How many of you have? Yes, all these people who quote Rumi, and I say to people, now don't get confused by that quote, you know, because I've studied deeply Rumi and other Sufi teachers. And he's not morally confused between right and wrong. Out beyond right and wrong, there is a field I meet you. He knew right and wrong very well. He knew that torture is wrong, right? You don't say out beyond right and wrong, so you go ahead and torture or whatever. So the right and the wrong, the polarities of right and wrong, are our training wheels of our moral development, our moral core. And what you start to get to in the non-dual state, beyond that, is the amplification of the moral core that extends into the realm of compassion, just as I mentioned with the Shahaks. Just as I met Ali Abu Awad, Palestinian man whose 5-year-old daughter was shot in the back of the head with a rubber bullet by an Israeli soldier and killed, who says, I can do nothing to demean my enemy. That's his response. I can do nothing to demean my enemy. Why? Because otherwise it will diminish my moral core. Esther Golan, Holocaust survivor, who said to me, you know, I don't know about healing. I can't heal the Holocaust. Don't talk to me about healing the Holocaust. I can't forgive. Don't tell me about forgiving the Holocaust. I'm like, okay. And yet she's a lady I'm visiting because she's reaching out in dialogue to the Palestinians. And I say to her, what is it? It's that moral core. The moral core. You know, a soldier returning from Iraq talked about moral trauma. That what he saw and asked to do was traumatizing his moral being. And there's something that we can get to in human beings where we actually enter, I believe, the core of that moral being, which is non-polarized. It's really the transcendent state with regard to stress, because it always sees Ubuntu. I see in you me. I see another one of me. I am because you are. It is profoundly humanistic. It sees in the other what my mother used to say, there but for the grace of God go I. Right? My mother could say that about anything, about anyone. I see many of you nodding your heads, yes, because that's deep into the moral core that says the human equation is somehow a connective celebration of beingness together. Right? That's a little awkwardly said, but I think you understand what I'm saying. So those unconditional states that start to emerge in the final embrace, like unconditional love, How many of us discovered in the process of what we thought was unconditional love that it was conditional? It's like, as long as you continue to keep those grades up, and as long as you continue to be the one who's really giving me consolation, you know, oh, the conditions get so subtle, you have to read the fine print, you know. Wow. But we can reach a state of unconditional love. It's a very high state. I believe that we don't get there in any shortcut. I don't think there's an easy way. The path does not get easier, but it gets deeper, richer, more profound. Which do you want, the quick and easy or the more profound? You know, the Sufis say, Mahmud Abtal simply says, your heart must face its tests until some sweets turn bitter in the end. Your heart will never answer yes. When the bitter and the sweet become one, that's the place we're looking for, not the short circuit. That's the adventure of being a human, isn't it? That we are initiated into all of these challenges, and yet we are so glorious when we go through them and discover how big the story is. And my life is amazing at the moment because I'm doing a lot more of this international work. So I see more and more people like the Shahaks, like Esther Golan, like Ali Abu Awad, like Devota in Rwanda, whose children are slaughtered around her, and yet who forgives the killers in this most incredible moment of reaching out for forgiveness. People like Frances McEnany in Northern Ireland. I was doing a social healing workshop in Northern Ireland, and Frances, a little older than me, but she was sitting there, and you know, it's still in Northern Ireland. Some of you ladies will like this. They carry those lovely little handbags, you know. A handbag. So Frances with her handbag, and I say to her, Frances, how did you get into this reconciliation work between Protestants and Catholics? She said, oh, well, about 10 years ago I was walking down the streets and they were shooting from the roof, and I got shot at. I was trying to get into my office, and one of the bullets went through my arm and into my chest and got lodged next to my aorta. And I lost pints and pints of blood, and I was driven to a hospital 15 miles away. And when I came to consciousness, the doctor was whispering, and my family was there. I'm trying to make her as comfortable as possible, but you know, there's no hope. And then the doctor says to her, you know, Frances, you've got a bullet lodged next to your heart. We cannot operate. Cannot take that bullet out. And I hear and many stories like this. About a month later, the doctor comes to her and says, Frances, you're going to have to get on with the rest of your life. And she says, what? With a bullet next to my heart? I mean, if you want to have a stress story, well, I've got a bullet next to my heart. Trump that. You're stressed? It's a good one, isn't it? Good line there. I've got a bullet next to my heart. Forget it. And so she goes about her life reconciling differences with a bullet next to her life. Not the victim story, not trapped in the old story, because you could make a profession out of that, right? But rather taking the velocity of hatred and unskillfulness that was in that bullet and saying, I'm a human being who is capacitated to take any energy that comes at me, have it be my teacher, and have it expand me and my capacity to do service on the planet. And I say to you in conclusion, this is the moment collectively when there is a kind of bullet that is either at our heart or on our way to our heart. If you look at the state of the world, I was in a meeting with 40 members of the Obama administration just a few months ago. I was invited for a meeting on policy making and systems theory. And they were talking openly about countries running out of water, failing states, nuclear weapons, climate imbalances, all of those things. So the bullet is in, the crisis is in, the energy of challenge at its severest levels are in. And that's not the end of the story, is it? Thank you. Thank you. Mother, give them the book. Thank you. Thank you.